Hello, everybody. Welcome to Everything is Energy, and welcome to the offering today, which is the energetic overview for the month of May 2026. And May is an interesting month. It's simultaneously still a very fast month, a very transformational month, but it's different than April. April had this kind of intensity, um, activation energy about it. And that was partly and mostly because of all the planets in Aries and all the things that were going on in Aries during the month of April. And now that we're into May, we're moving into Taurus season. Taurus is a fixed earth sign, and that means that it is inviting, Sun being in Taurus, grounding and stabilization and embodiment. So on the one hand, where Aries might have initiated something, Taurus is sustaining it and embodying it. And that shift is important because the energy from April has not disappeared. It's still very much alive. And a lot of these energies are still gonna continue to build throughout the year, especially into summer. We've still got a lot going on in terms of transformation. Um, Peaking in summer months is what I would kind of offer. But May really asks us to slow down enough to integrate what has already begun. And there's a really important lesson there. And Taurus, Sun in Taurus is there to teach and remind us to root into our physical vessel, into the body, root into the earth, and also into, what is actually real. And that is in both in the physical world as well as in the energetic world. What's worth maintaining? What can actually hold? What can actually sustain? Not just on autopilot, because this is what we have to do. The question might be, what do I want to build with consistency? And also, alternatively, caveat, this month is not about inviting more. It's about anchoring what's already begun or what's already been activated, possibly even set into motion. And, we're I've spoken a lot about this, the outer planets changing signs. We're still very much inside of one of the most significant astrological transitions on the one hand, in recent years, absolutely. On the other hand, in hundreds and thousands of years, quite possibly. We now have Pluto in Aquarius. We now have Neptune in Aries. We now have Uranus in Gemini. These are all subtle, energetic outer planets, generational planets, because they're slow moving and because their orbits are so many years that they're called generational planets because it's not a personal thing that you can experience and put your finger on what that means. So when they change signs, that means they reshape the collective landscape. Any one of those planets would reshape the collective landscape, and we've got all three. And it's also especially notable about that we have moved now with, you know, Uranus is ingressed into Gemini, which I'll touch on lightly again. That took place at the end of April. We've now moved out of earth and water signs and into fire and air signs. And that's a very noticeable shift. Earth and water signs stabilize and contain. And if you think about how air feeds fire, fire and air activate and move things. So collectively, we're shifting away from this kind of containment energy. And if we think about the top-down structures we're into an activative energy. We're shifting from stability into change. We're shifting from form into movement. And, while Pluto in Aquarius, is very much about a shift from top down to decentralized power systems and networks and communities, Pluto in Aquarius also is transforming our systems, our technology, our collective structures. And Neptune in Aries is, really inviting the dissolution, the reimagining of identity and personal direction. And now we have Uranus and Gemini. I'm gonna focus on Uranus here for a bit in this post, especially because Uranus is just so active in May, both in the foreground and in the background. You know, Uranus and Gemini is awakening our mental field, awakening our understanding of our mind, of our communication, of our perception of who we are as creative beings, creators, excuse me. This is not subtle, any one of those three, and those three together just kind of make it a multi-year reorientation that we're just stepping into. Uranus just went into Gemini like a couple weeks ago. These are years and years and years long processes. So, we're going into just dipping our toe in right now, a multi-year reorientation about how we think, how we act, and also how we evolve as a community, as a collective here on this planet. And, May carries with it still a very strong sense of forward motion because most planets are moving direct, and that sort of supports that progress, that action, that kind of external movement. The one exception is that on May 5th, I believe, or 6th, Pluto's stationing retrograde. But because Pluto is subtle energy, Pluto's not necessarily going to slow things down in an obvious way. Instead, it's going to turn our transformation inward. And so Pluto's going to invite us to really check in with what deeper patterns, because Pluto is about plumbing the depths, need to be, or it would be well to re-examine. Also, Pluto's about power dynamics, right? What power dynamics could we uh, review and revise and come to understand more with more clarity? So, that's the only retrograde action, and that is, as I mentioned, I get the sense of Pluto, it's very much an internal one. And we also have this month a blue moon. We have two full moons, one on May 1st, one on May 31st. And that's kind of a special thing. I'll get to that in the lunar podcasts as those happen. But really what that's going to do this month is it's going to amplify our emotional body illumination and the culmination of energy. So full moons always bring awareness, but this month kind of holds a dynamic where things are moving forward externally with deeper internal transformation simultaneously happening. So that's unique. But I want to really kind of, as I mentioned, put the lens on Uranus and focus there for a second because Uranus just entered Gemini. It's April 25th that happened. And we're only just beginning to feel this. And, while the lightning bolt of change, which is Uranus, is sudden and it's disruptive and it's innovative, it's worth just remembering where we've just been because Uranus was in Taurus. And at that point, it was working through our material systems, our sense of stability, our physical body, our connection to our earth, and often creating tension between change and resistance. The tension came from the fact that Taurus, as I mentioned, is fixed earth. Taurus is known as a sign that prefers consistency. And Uranus and Taurus aren't always the best bedfellows. The lightning bolt of change isn't always going to want to push repeat just because it's comfy. And that's not so to say that's what Taurus is, but Uranus and Gemini is going to be a much more symbiotic, simpatico combination because Gemini is, if we're going from fixed earth, as I mentioned, with Taurus to mutable air, it's just what it sounds like, shape shifting, thought forms shifting. Gemini is known for its adaptability. It's known for its curiosity. It's known for its mental curiosity and orientation. So instead of resisting change, maybe in Taurus, Gemini is going to kind of throw open the floodgates, open the doors for this rapid movement of new ideas. And so Uranus and Gemini, and we're really going to start to feel this in May, and I'll get to why in a second, but it's going to start to awaken our mental body, but also our understanding of our cognitive, but really our consciousness capacity. And it's going to help for us to really expand our perception, expand our understanding of communication. So, you know, ideological breakthroughs, new ways of thinking or insights. This is just a time where our mental bodies are literally waking up. And as we move through May, we're going to start to feel something that's actually going to take place in and be exact in July, but it's really getting operational here now because these two planets, it's about it. There's a trine between Uranus and Pluto that's going to peak in July, which is one of the reasons why summer is going to be peaking some serious energy. But for right now, this trine has been loosely operational, but the planets Uranus and Pluto, very slow moving, are getting really close. And so, this a trine is a flow of energy. A trine represents, harmony and flow and opportunity. So this is a supportive connection between Uranus's innovation and awakening and between, the deep transformation of Pluto and Aquarius. So to combine those transformational breakthroughs, one possibility. And so even though the exact alignment is in July, the energy is very much operational beginning in May. So that means that we might really start to notice, that certain new ideas feel powerful and feel transformative. And maybe there's some shifts in perception that create lasting change for our sense of our agency in our lives and our world. And even beyond ourselves as individuals, there's this sense of collective awakening that's happening here. And so this energy is going to intensify as we move toward July, because especially Mars is going to be conjunct to Uranus at the time. That's going to add fuel to the activation. But for now, May is giving us a preview of what is building. And one of the things I love about astrology is, even as I say when I do these weekly forecasts and I talk about the exact conjunctions, things are cuspy. And by cuspy, I mean there's a cusp of energy on the front and the back. If the activation is right here, then we can feel its momentum coming. We can start to work with the energy before it's acute or exact. And we can also continue to work with the energy. So if we're really working with the energy, which is why I love teaching Astrology 101, there don't need to be too many surprises. Um, so with that being said, we have a lot going on. We have a strong lunar rhythm this month. I mentioned the idea that we have a full moon on May 1st. We also have our new moon in Taurus on May 16th. We have another full moon on May 31st. And I'm kind of mentioning that the new moon is in Taurus already because it's pretty important in that it's conjunct to Pluto and it's sitting at the midpoint between Venus and Mars. And this is kind of creating a really powerful moment for Plutonian transformation of our values and for some recalibration of our relationships and maybe even just some deep shifts into how we relate to stability and desire and connection. And, Taurus, as I mentioned, governs material stability, but it's also about resources and self-worth. And being an earth sign, it's about the physical body and our connection to the earth. So, worth noting, and I'll do a podcast on that later, but the new moon that, is going to be right in the middle of the month on the 16th, is going to has the potential to bring a lot of profound insight into what we truly value and what we are ready to transform, being in the midst of times of transformation. But I want to circle back to Uranus here because we haven't even gotten to the big piece. Uranus is exactly conjunct Sedna on May 24th. So Uranus is highly active throughout May, and Uranus, all the outer planets are highly active into summer, easy peasy. But, if there was this Mercury conjunct Uranus on May 18th, that can bring our sudden insights, right? That can bring our unexpected conversations or our rapid mental shifts. By the time we get to May 24th, this is a really rare and a very potent conjunction. And, I'll do a whole other deep dive on Uranus and Sedna because I feel like even though I've been soapboxing this, which is I could be there's a more positive word about the outer planets changing signs. Uranus and Sedna is going to sneak under the radar of a lot of folks because Sedna is relatively unknown compared to Pluto. But man, if we are really on the edge of understanding how powerful subtle energetics are, This is one of the biggest ones, honestly. This is another big one. This is up there with Pluto entering into Aquarius, easy. So just lightly, the myth of Sedna represents loss of control and a sense of betrayal and a descent into darkness. But really, it's about, those with power maybe misusing their power in a way that causes endings for transformation. So even though there might be deception and there might be dark things that seem to have power, executing power. In the myth, Sedna's father, as you know, takes her into a boat and throws her out to drown her. And then there's the whole story that I'll get into of how she's trying to save her own life and she ends up being cut into pieces and thrown into the sea. Not the brightest start of a myth by any stretch. But she becomes the Inuit sea goddess who's the birthing all sorts of things. And she's powerful and the source of so much abundance and beauty and wealth for humanity. That wouldn't have happened but for. So we are in those times. And this is so the message here, and I'll just touch on it lightly, but it's worth really landing it for the month of May now. It's a message of transformation, yes, of course, but it's a message of resilience. And it's a message of creation of new life from destruction. Because as I mentioned, Sedna ultimately becomes the Inuit goddess of the sea, the Inuit, the, the goddess of fertility who lives in the sea. And she's a source of nourishment and abundance, as I mentioned. So, the conjunction of these two is really going to potentially operationalize and highlight some themes around power and powerlessness, some themes around collective and personal trauma, and really some things around transformation through challenge and through difficulty. But beyond all that, the myth just shows us and just ends in this exclamation point that from destruction comes new life. And it's worth remembering that Pluto's totally comfortable with that. We might not be. Pluto's like, game on, let's go. Even though Pluto's not involved in the conjunction, Pluto's still also very active. So I'm just going to use the word alchemy for right now. And I'll put a pin in that when I circle back to really land the transmission of what Uranus and Sedna are um, about at the end of the month. But I also wanted, because I'm talking about Pluto now, the minor triangle that's been active for many months is still active with Uranus in Gemini, Pluto in Aquarius, and Neptune in Aries, and they're trining and sextiling each other. So this is just activating consciousness and upgrading consciousness itself. The elders are seeding in the light codes. If you're going to use that type of language, that is what's happening. Energetic upgrades are being beamed from the galactic center through here. There's more scientific ways to talk about the galactic sheet and the solar activity that's happening right now. But I want to kind of get to the Uranus and Pluto connection because I just alluded to it when I was talking about the myth. That connection in particular, it echoes periods of historical awakening. And I don't do a lot of history a lot, but it's worth noting the last significant alignment between these two was in the early 20th century. And it coincided with the rise of, depth psychology, Jungian psychology, the identification and legitimization and exploration of this notion of subconsciousness. Whether or not we agree with that right now, there's this sense of, it really pulled us out of being so beholden to this being a pen and that's it. There was also breakthroughs in quantum physics. There were quantum physics institutes that were started. And if we think about what quantum physics tells us, you can have two atoms and separate them on other sides of the world. And what you do to one, the other one happens to the other one. In terms of what physics, E equals MC squared and the idea of the laws of gravity and the idea of a pull ball hitting another pull ball and no loss of energy, that's one form of physics which we're very comfortable with. That's about this pen here. That's about what is in the 3D world and we can see and understand. Quantum physics lifts us up and out of physical space and time. That already happened in the 20th century, but there was only a couple scientists that were really even able to wrap their minds around it. If what is happening right now with Pluto and Aquarius and Neptune and Uranus all doing their shift, it's on, but especially because of the Uranus and Pluto connection. So we're entering a similar phase right now is just all I'll say because Uranus and Pluto, they're shifting our human understanding from linear cause and effect into multidimensional awareness. They're grounding that down and making that something that isn't just available for a couple special few quantum physicists. This is collective. That's huge. So we're in this phase now when remembering that we're not just participants in reality. As I love to say, we are the co-creators of it. And I just kind of want to top it off with so it was in the early 20th century where it was Uranus and Pluto, excuse me, were trining each other. And out of that came these things that I'm mentioning, like in-depth psychology, Jungian type stuff, and quantum physics. So not only do we have that now, but we also have Neptune in the mix with its sextiling, which just makes this whole thing go multidimensional even more. So with that, I feel like I've gone on for a while, but I really also want to land that, May carries the number in terms of energetic, numerological uh, stuff. May is the vibration of number 5 in general, every month of May. Change, movement, freedom, expansion, some unpredictability. In the northern hemisphere, it's spring. In the southern hemisphere, it's fall. So it's also a number that kind of disrupts any stagnation. It brings movement where things have been stuck. So, naturally May in general kind of feels dynamic. It feels expansive. But May in 2026, if we're looking for the universal number that's operational, which I think May as number 5 is kind of in the background, being like, hey, I'm always here. This is kind of the general gestalt of what I'm about. But when we add this year, which is a number 1 year, this makes May 2026 a number 6 year. And we're in a number 1 year. And if you remember, number 1 years are just that. They're creation birthing years. So now when we look at what, the number 6 is the universal number, and I offer that's kind of the more potent energy here. 6 is about responsibility and care and relationships and harmony and integration. It's kind of heart chakra-y, excuse me. So if 5 is about movement, 6 is about really a higher octave of that. It's about integration with care. It's about having these shifts happen, but not just being completely ballistic about it or feeling like we're on a roller coaster with that we have no control over. I'm mentioning heart chakra again for a reason because these times that we live in, our heart is so powerful, and it's part of how we create and it's part of how we navigate with our intuition, the shifting times. So, learning to move through change while maintaining integrity, learning to move through change while maintaining our connections. So I'm getting ready to close, but I kind of wanted to offer a couple thoughts and questions for us. Number 6 asks, how do we care for ourselves and others during times of transformation? How do we care for each other? And how do we create harmony and maybe even strengthen bonds within change? How do we build communication within change? How do we build something meaningful from what's shifting in general? And, it's also worth to, numerology and astrology are definitely interconnected and interlinked. In an astrological sense, number 6 is associated and resonates with Venusian energy. And so Venus, heart chakra, right? Relationships, beauty, values, connection, harmony, justice. So I kind of wanted to end with that because even in a month of just movement and awakening and so much going on energetically, there's this undercurrent that is present. And this undercurrent is grounding through our connection and grounding through our heart and grounding through caring and really aligning who we are with what truly matters to us. So just kind of in some, May's not a quiet month per se. It's a month where the mind is awakening, the mental field is awakening. It's a month where change can accelerate. And it's also a month where deeper transformations are still very much afoot and may not even really fully come onto our radar until what I'm talking about is also summer. So, but amidst all that, May also asks us to stay grounded, and it asks us and invites us to stay connected. And it invites us to act with and speak and communicate, especially with intention and from our heart. Because, you know, it's not just change for the sake of change. This is change that is shaping the field of what's coming next. This is change that is shaping the field of what's possible. So again, this is not a time to throw our hands in the air and run around screaming. It's a time to be like, how can I tend to myself, tend to others, act in alignment and with integrity, and be a part of this universal global transformation. All right, guys, have a wonderful, beautiful month of May. Stay tuned for my deep dive of Uranus conjoining Sedna towards the end of the month, and check out my weekly meditations and my new moon and full moon podcast for the month. Tons of love. Thank you for being here. Take good care.